Hello everyone, Sidewin here, and today I'm going to be talking about the Villainous archetype of the Incarnation of Evil. This is essentially the archetype that is just utterly evil, and in fact, it might even be evil itself. So, these are some questions that might be raised by this type of villain. And all of them highlight the main thing to note about this. This villain is not conflict raising in its existence necessarily, except for perhaps confirming the question that pure evil does exist. However, most of these questions are focusing on how the questions, like how the villain throws these right back on the heroes. Because all of them are asking, how does this villain affect the heroes and their allies? Like the first one, is everyone able to avoid corruption? Leading to the player character questions of, will I be able to resist? Or will I eventually succumb? Because this type of villain essentially tempts people, constantly tempts, by offering power. The second question is, who can I trust to stand by my side against it? Who can resist corruption and temptation? Who will falter? This is essentially asking, which of the hero's allies will stay by them? Who can the player's characters trust to not crumble at the hint of temptation? Who will crumble when offered, say, any power they want, or great wealth? And the final one is, can mortals overcome it, or only mitigate the damage? Can this villain be permanently destroyed? Or can it only be temporarily locked away? Perhaps the heroes need divine aid to win against this incarnation of evilness itself frequently. These are the types of villains that are like demon lords and even an evil god. Mortals cannot always triumph against these forces, and sometimes these forces cannot be permanently defeated. However, there's another way that this can be taken. Because if the villain is a powerful demon lord, and you're playing in Pathfinder, another level-based system, your heroes may eventually be able to just kill it, which is absolutely a path you can take. In fact, it can actually be a fairly good path to take, because these villains are good for when you want a more, like, chill game, because there is really no question about who is evil and who is not, except for amongst perhaps allies. But most people don't have any problem with killing 3 things in games. Number 1, things that are mindless. Think a undead zombie. No one has a problem with killing zombies. Number 2 is things which are just innately evil, such as the Incarnation and probably most of its minions. Think things like demons or devils. And number 3 is probably not so related here, but it's basically slave traders. That is something that I've never seen a player have a problem with murdering, and it's quite sensible there. So this final slide is about how you can make the Incarnation of Evil more interesting, because it really is such an unnuanced villain that you have to have something else, usually, unless you just want a slasher. Hack and slash, Demon Lord works well. But to start, you might go with description. These are just essentially fleshing it out, making it seem more visceral and real. So the first one is describe insignia and dress. Like, create symbols that your PCs will fear. Think things like the Stormtrooper uniforms in Star Wars, or the Black Hand in Lord of the Rings. These are symbols which the heroes immediately know, and they immediately know that is something that they are fighting. Number 2 is describe the minions of the villain and their actions and what they are. Like, why are they a threat? Again, Lord of the Rings is kind of the trope codifier for this entire thing, so I'm going to go back to it. The Uruk-hai are far more threatening than their prior ancestors. And they are described as hulking giant monsters, which seem especially threatening to the small protagonists. Then you can also go more into the description on what will it take to defeat this villain. Because in general, defeating a incarnation of evil itself is very, very difficult. Think the One Ring from Lord of the Rings, or a lich. Because a lich might hide their phylactery or whatever they made somewhere very, very far away, and then the heroes have to go and find it. And finding something is very, very difficult, and it can make an interesting campaign in and of itself. If you're running around, going between castle to fortress to dungeon, you're probably going to have the heroes keep getting frustrated until they finally find it. Then once they found that item, that phylactery, what are they going to do with it? What does it take to actually destroy that? And that's kind of how, this description matters, because the campaign is founded on what does it take to defeat this thing, and it can be very difficult to defeat something even once you have the thing you need to destroy, because you have to get it to a place where you can destroy it, and then you have to destroy it. And from this, does destroying it immediately destroy the entity? Or does the entity stay around and is now very, very mad and wants you dead? Either can work. But one of them will result in a fight against the entity, whereas the other will not. Then I'm going to go into characterization. So the first thing I'll mention is that you might want to create a dragon. This is a trope on TV Tropes. I will link their article below. But essentially, it's the second in command for the Incarnation of Evil. Oftentimes a mortal who has been corrupted. Think Darth Vader from Star Wars. The dragon is oftentimes the person who the heroes interact with sooner, because it's what's actually bringing the power of the villain and bringing it down upon people. And this can also make it so that the dragon can be more interesting than the incarnation. In fact, usually the dragon is the more interesting of the two. And it's usually who a lot of the conflict is based around. Because your dragon might be, say, a fallen hero, and you have all the benefits of a fallen hero, but you have the corrupting entity in the form of the incarnation. Essentially, the dragon should be a different archetype of villain. But that dragon can oftentimes be a good way to show what can the incarnation do. Because since the dragon is the second in command, it's oftentimes the person who has been given the most power by the incarnation. So if the incarnation is an avatar of torment, perhaps the dragon tortures people and has powers which make it very easy to do it. If the incarnation says he can grant whatever wishes someone has, the dragon will be someone whose wishes were granted. Another example of a dragon is the Chaos Lords from Warhammer. In fact, these can be very good ideas on how to characterize a dragon. They're just people who swore themselves over to the Chaos Gods in Warhammer. And if you look between them, you'll see various ways to have a dragon behave. And I'm not going farther because you can look that up if you want to see M-rated content. Then, the second thing to consider in characterization is simply how is the incarnation characterized? What does it enjoy doing? Or what is it driven to do? Does it have enjoyment? Because, we're talking about a literal force of evil. Does it even have a personality? Which is, again, why you would have the dragon. But perhaps it does have a personality. Think like a demon lord or an archdevil. That character does have a personality, even though it's inherently evil. Perhaps they enjoy luxury, so then they would enjoy basking in various luxurious places. Their palace would be basically filled with decadence, and they would dress in the finest clothes and just generally bask in decadence. That can be a very good way to characterize an archdevil of pleasure. But then, what's powering all that decadence? Perhaps they take souls and use souls to power their horrific thing. Perhaps they enslave people. Essentially, if it does have a personality, what is it doing to get what it wants? Because it doesn't have moral restrictions. It could perhaps be a spoiled brat on top of being an incarnation of evil. The difference is very frequently, if an incarnation does have a personality, they just enjoy doing one type of heinous act repeatedly. Like they take pleasure in it. Again, like tormenting, or claiming souls, or any other terrible deed. Or perhaps they enjoy tempting others, using mortals as pawns to do the deed. That's another way that you might characterize this type of villain. The final thing to consider is, what if the incarnation is not actually the strongest thing? What if it obeys something greater? Now note, for weaker versions of the incarnation, like, say, a certain type of devil, this question can be like, quite, we just did that with the player characters, because perhaps your first arc of the campaign, say going to level 10 or level 12, the player characters were just fighting this one incarnation of evil, say a devil of pleasure. Nearly an archdevil, but not quite. Then, once they kill that devil, turns out his mistress is quite angry. So now you have another arc your campaign can go right into, as your players attempt to fight and kill the other pleasure demon. It can be a good way to continue a campaign, essentially. And it can also help determine how this character behaves, because if they have a personality, do they want to be the lesser power? Because if they don't, and the greater power is actually the incarnation who's causing all the problems, perhaps that lesser power will join with the player characters to kill the bigger guy, and then ascend himself. Does the lesser power then become equally terrible? Maybe. Does the lesser power then quit bothering the player characters? Maybe. Perhaps there's some form of twisted gratitude. Or perhaps there's a lot of, I tricked them, now they're going to pay for it. To leave you with a question, how would you take this trope and use it to base a campaign? Essentially, what fits in your worlds? Please answer in the comments below, and thank you for watching.